The first thing Marisol Begay knew for certain was that the prickly pear fruit had gone bad. She knew it by the sourness on her tongue, by the bitter pull at the back of her throat, by the way her stomach clenched against it, even while her hands kept lifting another piece to her mouth. It had been split by sun and dust until the red flesh inside looked more like old wound than food, and there were ants working the edges of it, and she brushed them away with 2 fingers that had begun to tremble sometime before noon. She ate anyway. Hunger had stopped asking permission. The wash lay dry beneath her, a pale scar cut through the New Mexico earth with mesquite roots holding to the banks like old hands that refused burial. Above it, the land rose in ledges of red stone and pinon scrub, the kind of country that looked empty until you were alone in it and learned how many eyes the empty places had. A buzzard circled somewhere high enough to be a thought. The sun was dropping, but not kindly. It dragged its heat sideways across the desert and left every stone shining with a hard yellow light. Mari sat with her back against a twisted mesquite trunk, her skirt dusty to the knees, her rolled blanket tied with rope beside her, and her mother's blue bead necklace hidden under her blouse where no one could see it and take its measure. Her shoes had rubbed the skin raw above both heels. Her mouth was dry enough that swallowing felt like dragging cloth down a well rope. She had walked 2 days from the trading post. 2 days since Calvin Pike, with his soft hands and his trader's smile, had stood in the kitchen doorway and told her there was no more room for a woman who ate up profit faster than she earned it. He had said it where the freight men could hear. He had said it with his eyes moving over her body like her shape was evidence brought before it. He had paid her $6 short and told her to be grateful he had paid her anything at all. Mari had not thrown the iron skillet at him. That was the thing she held to while she walked, turning it over in her mind like a hot coal that would not cool. She had not thrown the skillet. She had not begged. She had not cried in front of those men. She had gathered her blanket, her coffee tin, the small packet of dried chili her mother had left in a jar, and she had gone out through the back door while Pike's nephew laughed into his sleeve. People had called her many things in her life. Big girl, heavy girl, good for lifting flour sacks, good for standing near a stove in winter, good for jokes made low enough that the speaker could deny them if challenged. They had looked at her body and decided they knew her hunger, her laziness, her worth, her wants. It didn't matter that she had fed men who could not lift a spoon by morning and had them riding by noon. It didn't matter that she could make a sack of beans stretch a week longer than it had any right to. It didn't matter that her mother, Altagracia Begay, had taught her to read a pantry the way a tracker read sand. A woman could know how to keep people alive and still be treated like the appetite she was accused of having. The prickly pear turned in her stomach. Mari closed her eyes and breathed through her nose. She would not vomit. She could not afford to lose what little she had swallowed. She pressed one hand to her middle and waited for the sickness to pass. That was when she heard the horse. Not the wild, distant thunder of a loose herd, but the measured step of a ridden animal picking its way along the wash rim. Mari opened her eyes. Her first thought was to hide the fruit in her lap, which was foolish, because a woman sitting in the dirt at the edge of a dry wash with dust on her mouth had no dignity left to protect from a piece of spoiled cactus. Her second thought was that dignity was sometimes the last thing a person had because it required no roof, no wage, and no witness willing to grant it. She sat straighter. The rider stopped at the rise above her. He was a lean man on a dun horse, maybe 35, with a dark hat pulled low, and a blue shirt faded near white at the shoulders. His face had the brown steadiness of a man who had lived under the same sun that was now burning the back of Mari's neck. There was Navajo in him, and Mexican too, perhaps in the shape of his cheekbones and the careful set of his mouth. A rifle sat in the saddle boot, but his hand was not near it. He looked at the fruit in her hand. He looked at her face. Then he took off his hat. That small courtesy nearly undid her. Men had tipped hats to ladies in town while stepping around Mari like she was a barrel in their path. Men had removed hats in church and left them on when asking her to haul water. Men had looked at her hunger and made a lesson of it. This one took off his hat before saying a word, and she distrusted him for it because kindness had too often been the cloth wrapped around a hook. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to ask you something that may sound strange standing where you are and me where I am. I'd be obliged if you heard it before deciding what kind of fool I am." His voice was low and plain, not soft, not hard. A working voice. Mari did not answer. The fruit lay red and accusing in her palm. "My name is Tomas Yazzie," he said. "I run the Yazzie Montoya place about 3 miles west of here. I've got 12 riders, 2 sheepmen, An old horse handler who tells me what I should have done after it's too late, and a winter drive pressing down on us like weather. My cook left 4 days ago after telling me my flour was poor, my stove was cursed, and my men had no manners. She was right about 2 of those things. Despite herself, Marie almost breathed a laugh. It did not make it out. Thomas shifted his hat in his hands. Since then, we've been living on burned beans, coffee that tastes like boiled rope, and tortillas hard enough to sole a boot. I came out checking a spring that's gone mean on me, and I found you here. His eyes dropped once to the prickly pear, then rose again to her face. So I'm asking straight because I don't know a kinder way that doesn't insult us both. Can you cook? The wash seemed to hold still around the question. Mari had expected pity, or suspicion, or a command to move along before dark. She had expected the usual weighing a woman alone, a body judged a face tired enough to be mistaken for guilt. She had not expected work to appear out of the red dust and ask for her by the name of what she could do. Her fingers closed around the fruit until the spoiled flesh pressed wet between them. Are you asking because you need a cook, she said? Or because you feel sorry for a big woman eating cactus by a dry wash? Something moved in his face, not surprise exactly, but the recognition of a door. He had better enter carefully. I need a cook, he said. If I meant pity, I'd offer you a sermon and a stale biscuit. I haven't got much use for either. She looked away, then not because she was ashamed to be seen, but because some answers required room. The red ridges beyond the wash were beginning to darken along their bases. Evening was coming. Night in this country could turn a hungry woman into a thing the morning found without name. What pay, she asked. Fair pay. $30 a month if you can feed a crew through winter, room with a latch, food before work tonight because a hungry cook is a danger to herself and everybody with a tongue. I won't ask about this wash unless you choose to tell me, and no man on my place lays a hand or a joke on you and keeps his teeth comfortable. Mari watched him for the lie. She had gotten good at watching men lie. It usually showed in the hurry. A man lying wanted to get past his words before they spoiled in the air. Tomas Yazzie did not hurry. He stood with his hat in both hands and let the silence test him. Her legs ached before she stood. Her knees sent pain upward, and the world swayed once hard enough that she had to put a hand against the mesquite trunk. Tomas took one step as if to help and then stopped himself. That restraint decided more than the offer had. Mari wiped her palm on her skirt. She lifted her chin. I can cook, she said, but I won't be pitied while I do it. No, ma'am, he said. I expect not. He brought the horse down into the wash and offered his hand only when she had already taken one step toward him. She accepted because pride was not the same thing as foolishness, and her legs had reached the end of what pride could carry. His grip was firm and impersonal, the grip of a man helping another human being into a saddle, not collecting gratitude. She rode behind him with both hands fixed to the back of the saddle and her blanket tied behind the cantle. The country opened as they climbed from the wash. Red mesas stood in the distance like walls built by a patient god. The last light caught the pinyon tops and turned them black at the edges. Somewhere a coyote called once and was answered from farther off. Tomas did not fill the ride with questions. That was another mercy she did not trust yet, but noticed all the same. After a time, the ranch appeared below a sandstone ridge, low adobe house, cookhouse, chimney barn, corrals, sheep pens, and a bunkhouse with men moving in the yard, slow and tired. It was not a rich place, but it was a living one. A windmill turned with a dry complaint. Smoke came thinly from the cookhouse, uncertain as a prayer from a man not sure anyone was listening. Mari felt something tighten in her chest. A kitchen chimney meant a room with a stove. A stove meant fire. Fire meant a chance to turn what was there into what was needed. She had trusted very little in her life since her mother died, but she trusted that. Men looked up as Tomas rode in with her. Some stared openly. One nudged another until Justine Nez, old and straight back near the corral gate, said something in Navajo too low for Mari to catch, but sharp enough to put their eyes elsewhere. Clara Montoya, a thin girl with laundry water darkening her apron, watched from beside the pump with the wary look of a strayed dog that had already learned every boot had a mood. Tomas helped Mari down. Her feet hit earth and nearly failed her. She made them hold. This way, he said. The cookhouse smelled of old grease-burned coffee-wet ash and defeat. Pot sat where no pot ought to sit. A sack of flour had been left open to dust. Chili pods hung from a beam, good ones but neglected. Beans lay mixed with pebbles in a shallow pan. The iron stove in the corner was sound black and waiting. Mari stood in the middle of the ruin and felt for the first time in 2 days hunger step back from the front of her mind. Here was work. Not mockery, not road, not spoiled fruit eaten in the dirt while buzzards wrote circles overhead. Work. She set her coffee tin on the table and touched the stove with 2 fingers. It was cold, but not dead. "What have you got?" she asked. Tomas looked around as though the kitchen might answer better than he could. Beans, cornmeal, dried mutton, some onions if they haven't gone soft, coffee, maybe peaches in a crock. I don't know what else. That much is plain. He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw the corner of his mouth consider a smile and think better of it. Mari rolled up her sleeves. Her arms were brown and strong dust at the wrists, flour scars old and pale across 2 knuckles. She went to the shelf, opened tins, lifted sacks, smelled the mutton, checked the onions, found the peaches, tested the cornmeal between finger and thumb. The kitchen began arranging itself in her mind faster than her body could follow. Tomas stood in the doorway. She looked over her shoulder. "Bring me water, wood, every onion that isn't rotten, and whoever knows where the salt is kept." "Yes, ma'am." And after that she said, turning back to the stove, "Go away until I call you." This time he did smile, small and tired. "That bad? I don't yet know your kitchen, Mr. Yazzie. I'd rather not meet it with an audience." He nodded once and left. And Mari heard his boots cross the yard. She heard him give orders. A moment later, Clara appeared with a bucket of water held in both hands and fear tucked behind her eyes. "Set it there," Mari said gently. "Then wash your hands. You can sort beans if you know how." Clara blinked. "Yes, ma'am. I'm not ma'am enough for that. Mari will do." The girl looked at her, uncertain whether kindness was safe. Mari turned to the cold stove, reached for kindling, and struck the first match. The flame caught small, then stronger. Outside, boots began gathering near the cookhouse. Men smelled chill warming before they had any right to hope for it. Mari fed wood into the stove and listened to the fire take hold. By the time darkness settled against the windows, the kitchen had begun to breathe again. By the time the first bowl reached the first man's hands, the room had already gone quieter than a bunkhouse had any natural right to go. Men who had been leaning in the doorway with their thumbs hooked in their belts came inside one by one, drawn less by hope than by the smell of something they had forgotten a kitchen could do. Red chile had bloomed in hot fat. Mutton had softened with onion until the sharpness left it. Beans that had looked like gravel in a pan now sat thick and dark in a pot salted right. Not drowned, not scorched, not made apologetic by a man who did not know what patience was. The blue corn cakes came off the iron warm and edged with brown, and the coffee stood black in the pot, bitter in the honest way and not the mean one. Mari served without looking for praise. She knew men hungry from work had a way of turning into boys around food, and boys could be cruel when they were ashamed of wanting. She set bowls down, passed corn cakes, filled cups, and did not ask any man whether it suited him. Clara stood near the wash table, holding a stack of tin plates against her chest, watching with eyes too large for her narrow face. Tomas came in last and stood just inside the door, as if he did not want to disturb the thing already happening. Hostin Nez sat at the far end of the table, old shoulders straight, gray hair tied back, his hands folded before him until Mari put a bowl in front of him. He looked at the stew. He looked at her. Then he picked up his spoon. The first sound was metal against tin. After that, there was nothing but eating. That was how Mari knew the food was good. Compliments could lie. Silence had a harder time of it. The riders bent over their bowls with the grave concentration of men receiving something they had needed longer than they meant to admit. A young hand with dust in his eyebrows took one bite, stopped, and looked at the bowl as though it had spoken to him. Another reached for a corn cake and then glanced around, embarrassed by the speed of his own hand. Mari went back to the stove. The room warmed. The steam rose. The smell of chili coffee, mutton, and corn gathered against the low rafters and drove out the old stink of burned grease and defeat. Outside, darkness pressed against the windows, but inside the cookhouse there was fire enough to hold it off. Hostin Nez finished half his bowl before he spoke. "This kitchen has found its woman." No one laughed. No one made a joke out of it. That mattered. Mari had heard words all her life thrown at her like stones wrapped in cloth. Big woman, heavy-footed, good appetite, takes up room, the kind of words people used when they wanted cruelty to look like observation. But Hostin said woman as if it meant place, not size, as if a room could know the shape of the person meant to stand in it. She kept her eyes on the pot and stirred once, though nothing needed stirring. "Eat before it cools," she said. Hostin's mouth twitched and he obeyed. Thomas took his bowl standing at first. Mari saw it from the corner of her eye and felt irritation rise before she had the strength to bury it. "There's a chair, Mr. Yazzie," she said. The men looked up. Tomas looked at the chair, then at her. Something in him seemed to measure whether a new cook had the right to tell the owner of the ranch where to sit on her first night. Then he sat. The men went back to eating. That too mattered. Mari did not take food until the bowls had gone around twice, and the pot had given all it could give without being scraped into tomorrow's breakfast. It was not humility. Humility had too often been expected from her by people who only meant smallness. It was order. The workers ate first because the workers had to rise before dawn, and she could not know how much there was until she saw how much was needed. When she finally sat at the small side table with her own bowl, her hands shook so badly she had to set the spoon down for a moment. Clara saw it. The girl looked away quickly, which was the first kindness Mari received from her. The stew hurt going down, because it was real food, and her stomach had forgotten the manners of receiving it. She ate slowly, though hunger begged otherwise. Her body wanted to shame her with speed. She would not let it. Across the room, Tomas watched once, then stopped watching, and that restraint settled somewhere near her ribs. By dawn, the kitchen belonged to work again. Mari woke before the rooster made his useless announcement and found Clara already outside the cookhouse with a bucket-thin arm stiff from the weight of it. "You were told to come?" Mari asked. The girl shook her head. "I heard you moving. That is not the same thing." "No." Mari opened the door and let her in. The room was cold, the stove gray. "Wash your hands, then sort those beans again. You left stones in them last night." Clara flushed. "I did." "You did? Better to learn from beans than from teeth." The girl stared at her, then gave the smallest smile. By the time the men came through the door, biscuits were coming out of the oven. Gravy sat thick in a pan, coffee was ready, and yesterday's beans had been stretched with onion and chile into something that did not taste like leftovers. Men entered still half in sleep and stopped as though they had walked into the wrong building. One of them, a broad-shouldered rider named Abel, muttered, "Lord." Mari set the biscuit pan down. "He's not cooking." "I am." A laugh went around the room, brief and startled. It did not wound. It loosened something. That first week, the ranch began changing in ways a person could miss if they only looked for large miracles. Men came in on time because meals came on time. Coffee was no longer a punishment. The sheepmen stopped quarreling over who had lost the smaller black ewe because both had enough breakfast in them to remember the ewe had been lame the day before. Horses felt quieter under hands that were not shaking from bad sleep and worse food. The riders came back from the range tired but not hollowed out. Tomas noticed it from the barn. Hostine noticed it from everywhere. Mari noticed the waste. She found flour spilled and swept it before ants could claim it. She cut soft spots from onions and saved the good. She dried leftover corn cakes near the stove for thickening. She set Clara to washing cloth properly, not just making it wet and calling it clean. She marked the coffee tin with a scratch so she could tell how fast it went down. By the fourth morning, the cookhouse had stopped looking like a room men survived and begun looking like a room that expected them back. Clara learned in silence at first. She was quick with her hands but slow to trust praise. When Mari showed her how to grind chili without breathing the dust, the girl nodded as if receiving orders from a colonel. When Mari told her she had folded the cloths well, Clara looked down at her hands like they belonged to someone else. "You don't have to be frightened of doing a thing right," Mari said. Clara's mouth tightened. "Sometimes right just means they give you more to do." Mari paused over the dough. There was truth in that. Too much truth for 16. "Then learn enough to decide which work is yours," she said. "There's a difference between being useful and being used." The girl did not answer, but she kept the words. On the fifth evening, Tomas came in after supper while Mari was wiping the stove. The men had gone back to the bunkhouse. Clara was outside hanging the last cloths by lamplight. Hostine sat on the step mending a bridle and pretending not to listen. "The drive's moving smoother," Tomas said. Mari rinsed the rag. "Good. Abel and Sisto made 12 miles with the sheep today and didn't come back ready to kill each other. That is also good. Hostine says the horses are easier." Hostine sees most things. Tomas leaned one shoulder against the doorframe hat in his hands the way he had held it at the wash. "You think that's all food?" Mari looked at him then. The lamplight marked the tired lines beside his mouth. He was not asking idly. He was trying to understand the thing he could see, but had not yet named. "A hungry man works with his anger," she said. "A fed man works with his hands." The words sat between them with the plainness of a tool laid on a table. Tomas nodded slowly. "My mother would have liked that." Mari went back to the stove because grief had entered the room, and grief deserved not to be stared at. What was her name, she asked. Azdza Lichii, he said. Then after a breath, some called her Rosa Montoya after my father, but she never much cared for a name given for convenience. She cooked here. She ran here. His voice changed on the word roughening slightly. The kitchen, the stores, the lambing, the men, when they got foolish, my father, when he got proud. After she died, the place kept moving. Cattle still needed water, sheep still needed counting, fences still broke. But it was like hearing a song with the middle gone. Mari wrung out the rag and folded it over the basin edge. A kitchen can go quiet for a while, she said. That does not mean it is dead. He looked at her for a long moment, and she felt the danger of having said too much. Not because the words were wrong, but because they had been true. Before he could answer, a shout tore across the yard. The sound came sharp, then doubled. A horse screamed. Something struck wood hard enough to make the cookhouse window tremble. Tomas was out the door first. Mari followed with the lamp, Clara running from the line with wet hands, Justine already moving faster than age should have allowed. They found Benito Salazar near the corral rail, curled around himself in the dirt. A young bay gelding stood trembling at the far side of the pen, eyes white, reins dragging. Benito's shirt was torn open along his ribs, and blood had spread dark beneath his hand. "Don't move him," Mari said. No one argued. That was the first time she knew the kitchen had already taught them something about her. She knelt in the dirt, set the lamp near Clara, and looked at the wound. Deep, ugly, but not where a man's last breath lived, if God was willing and infection kept its distance. "Clara," she said, "boil water. Bring clean cloth, the white stack, not the gray, needle thread, and the whiskey from the high shelf." Clara stared at the blood. "Look at me." The girl looked. Fear is fine. Shaking is fine. Dropping the lamp is not. "Go." Clara went. Benito groaned and tried to speak. Mari put a hand on his shoulder, heavy and steady. "You save your breath. This will hurt, and then it will be done hurting worse." Tomas crouched opposite her. "Can you stitch?" That Mari met his eyes. "I can, if nobody asks me twice." He closed his mouth. They carried Benito to the kitchen table because the kitchen had light water heat and clean cloth, and in hard country that made it nearer to a doctor than anything else within 20 miles. Mari washed her hands until they were red. She cleaned the wound while Benito cursed in Spanish and English, and one word that made Justine raise an eyebrow. Clara held the lamp with both hands, pale but steady. Mari stitched. The needle went in and out. Blood slowed. Cloth tightened. Benito's breathing eased from panic into pain. When it was done, Mari wrapped his ribs and made him drink a swallow of whiskey, then broth, because whiskey alone was a fool's medicine, and men liked fool's medicine too well. No one spoke for a while. Tomas stood at the end of the table looking at Benito alive, Clara still holding the lamp, and Mari washing blood from her hands into a basin gone pink. "Where did you learn that?" he asked quietly. Mari dried her hands. "My mother fed freighters, shepherds, railroad men, and families passing through with babies half sick from dust. Working people bleed. Women near the stove learn whether they want to or not." Justine gave a soft grunt of approval. Clara set the lamp down only after Mari nodded. The girl's hands were shaking at last. "You held steady," Mari told her. Clara swallowed. "I was scared. Most useful people are." Tomas looked as if he might say something more, but the door opened before he could. A rider stood there, his coat powdered with dust, his face drawn tight from distance. "Mr. Yazzie," he said, glancing once at the bloody cloths, then away. "Justine told me to come straight if I heard it again." Justine rose from the chair. The room changed around him. Tomas turned. "Heard what?" The rider took off his hat. "Elias Crowell's in Gallup, asking after your note. Asking hard. Says winter will settle the south grazing section one way or another." Tomas went still. Mari stood beside this basin with the towel in her hands, and the warmth of the kitchen seemed to draw inward like a flame touched by wind. She did not know the name Elias Crowell, but she knew the silence it brought. She had heard that kind of silence at trading counters, at freight yards, in rooms where money spoke first and people afterward. Across the room near Thomas's desk sat a locked wooden box she had dusted around that morning without touching. She looked at it once, then back to the stove where Benito's broth was cooling. Outside, the first cold wind of the season moved along the walls and found every crack. The cold came before daylight and found the ranch unready. It came down from the high ridges with teeth in it, slipping under doors, silvering the water. trough stiffening the mud near the sheep pens until every footprint from the evening before looked preserved in glass. By the time Mari opened the cookhouse door, the yard had changed color. The red earth wore a pale crust. The breath of the horses smoked in the barn shadows. Beyond the corrals, the mesas stood hard and dark beneath a sky that had not yet decided whether it meant to snow or only threaten it. She knew the difference between ordinary cold and trouble cold. Ordinary cold made men complain and reach for coffee. Trouble cold made animals bunch close to fences, made ropes stiff, made hinges shriek, made old injuries waken the bones before a person had taken 3 steps. Mari stood in the doorway with her shawl pulled around her shoulders and watched one of the younger riders' Sisto strike at the east trough with the back of an axe because the ice had formed thick enough to hold. Inside, Benito slept on a cot near the stove, his ribs bound clean, his face pale, but no longer frightened. Clara was already grinding coffee, her hair pinned badly, and her eyes still heavy with last night's shock. She had not spoken much since holding the lamp while Mari stitched Benito's side, but her hands had not failed once. Mari shut the door against the cold. More beans in the pot, she said. Less coffee in the measure. Clara looked up. Less. The men need warmth, not waste. We'll boil it longer and add a pinch of salt. It'll taste stronger than it is. Clara nodded and did it. That was how a hard season began, most times not with a gunshot or a shout, but with a smaller measure of coffee and nobody saying aloud what it meant. By noon, the ranch had gathered its troubles and laid them one by one at Tomas Yazzi's feet. The fence along the lower sheep pen had bowed where the animals pushed against it in the night. 2 ewes had gone lame from the frozen ground. A steer had cut its leg on broken wire. Abel came in sweating under his coat and said the South Spring had not frozen, praise God, but the shallow creek west of the barn had skinned over solid, and it would take men every morning to break it open. Hosteen Nez listened to all of it from beside the corral, his face turned toward the wind. Winter is early, he said. Tomas tightened the cinch on his saddle. Winter does not ask, no, Hosteen said, but sometimes it warns. Mari heard that through the cookhouse window while she cut squash into thick orange pieces and laid them in a pan with salt and chile. She looked toward the locked wooden box near Tomas's desk in the corner of the main room, visible through the open passage. Since the rider came with Crowell's name, the box had seemed to sit heavier than wood ought to sit. Men could hide fear in many places. Some put it in their temper, some put it in silence. Tomas had put his in a locked box. The man from Albuquerque arrived in the middle of the afternoon. He came in a black coat too clean for the ranch yard, riding a fine sorrel that picked its way through frozen ruts as though offended by them. A younger man rode behind him, carrying a leather satchel and wearing the blank expression of hired loyalty. The first man did not look toward the barn or the corrals. He looked at the house, then the cookhouse chimney, then the land beyond it, with the calm attention of someone pricing what had not yet been offered. Mari was lifting bread from the oven when he opened the cookhouse door without knocking. Cold entered with him. So did the smell of city wool oiled leather, and a cigar smoked somewhere far from hungry men. You must be the new cook, he said. Mari set the bread on the table. You must be lost. His eyes moved over her slow enough to be rude and practiced enough to seem accidental. She had known men like him at the trading post. They believed cruelty became manners if polished first. I am Elias Crowell, he said. I have business with Mr. Yazzie. Then you will find him in the barn, or wait outside the room where food is being made. The hired man behind him shifted, but Crowell smiled as if entertained. I was told this ranch had grown desperate, he said. I see it has at least grown bold in the kitchen. Mari wiped flour from her hands. A kitchen has to be bold when men enter without knocking. His smile thinned. Before he could answer, Tomas came in from the yard, cold, reddening his cheekbones, hat brim dusted with frost. Hosteen followed a few steps behind him and stopped near the door. Crowell Tomas said, Mr. Yazzie. Crowell turned as though the room had finally produced someone worth seeing. A hard morning by the look of things. Say what you came to say. Crowell removed a folded paper from inside his coat. He did not sit. Men like that preferred standing when delivering trouble. It gave the impression that judgment itself had legs. The note on your south grazing section stands due in December, he said. As you know, I purchased that note from the First Territorial Bank with all its terms intact. Missed payment forfeits claim. No grace after the 15th. I know the terms. I hope you know the season as well. Early freeze, weak market, a spring that I'm told makes that south section more necessary to you than ever. Crowell glanced toward Mari's shelves and the hanging chill pods. Winter has a way of clarifying ownership. Hostein's eyes narrowed. Tomas did not move. The payment will be made. Confidence is admirable. Cash is better. Crowell unfolded the paper and placed it on the table near the bread, too near it. I have a buyer prepared should you decide to spare yourself the humiliation of losing the land by default. Railroad supply interest. Good money. More than fair for a man carrying more range than he can manage. The bread steamed between them. Mari looked at the paper, then at Tomas. His face had become still in the way a man's face did when pride was holding the door shut against fear. Crowell's gaze returned to her. Of course, perhaps I misjudged. A ranch with bread on the table may not be starving yet. No, Mari said before she could decide not to. Starving comes later after men mistake paper for weather and money for water. The room went silent. Crowell looked at her as if a chair had spoken. Tomas turned his head slightly, not warning her, only noticing. Hostein made a sound low in his throat that might have been approval if it had been allowed to grow. Crowell gathered the paper back slowly. I will return when the date draws near. I suggest you count carefully before then. He left without closing the door. Hostein closed it after him with more force than necessary. For a while no one spoke. Then Tomas took the paper Crowell had left a copy of and folded it once, twice too sharply. I'll be in the barn. He went out into the cold. Hostein watched him go. A proud man will walk straight into a low branch if he is looking too hard at the horizon. Mari looked at the locked box. Hostein saw her see it. He said nothing. The evening meal came and went under a quiet strain. Men ate, but their listening had changed. Fear had a smell of its own. It lived beneath coffee and chili and meat, beneath wool coats steaming near the stove, beneath the smoke from the lamp. Benito slept through most of it. Clara kept dropping her gaze toward the desk. After the men left and Tomas still had not come in, Mari crossed the main room and stood before the locked box. Clara followed her, wiping her hands on her apron. Miss Mari. Mari tried the latch. Locked. Mr. Yazzie doesn't let anybody touch that. No, you shouldn't. Mari looked at the girl. Do you know where he keeps the key? Clara's face gave the answer before her mouth refused to. Clara. The girl swallowed. Top drawer, under the old seed book. Mari opened the drawer, found the key, and held it in her palm for one long breath. Clara whispered, He'll be angry. Numbers don't care who is allowed to read them. The key turned. Inside the box were ledgers, bank papers, receipts, grazing maps, and a small cloth pouch with nothing in it but 2 buttons and a dried flower, pressed flat as memory. Mari did not touch the pouch. Some grief was not part of the arithmetic. She opened the ledger. At first, the figures looked like any pantry after careless hands, not empty, not full, but misunderstood. Tomas had counted cattle wool cash, owed cash, due feed costs, freight charges, and the banknote. The columns were neat but lonely. They did not speak to one another. Mari pulled a chair close and began setting numbers beside numbers the way she set beans beside cornmeal in her mind. Clara stood across from her, afraid and fascinated. Bring me the supply slate, Mari said, and the marks you keep for flour, coffee sugar, and salt. You knew I kept marks. I knew somebody did, or this place would already be dead. The girl brought them. Mari worked until the lamps burned low. She counted wool not yet moved, hides salted but unsold, pinon sacks in the storage shed, lambs underweight but not hopeless, 3 steers that could gain if fed right, kitchen scraps that had been thrown to dogs instead of mixed with mash, coffee wasted by carelessness, sugar used as comfort when warmth would do, squash enough for 3 weeks if cut and stored properly, beans enough if no one mistook plenty for permission. When Tomas came in near midnight, frost still on his hat, he found the ledger open beneath Mari's hand. His face changed. It was not anger first, it was exposure. Then anger came to cover it. That box was locked. Yes, for a reason. Yes, Clara stepped backward into shadow. Mari did not rise. Crowell takes the south section, he takes the spring. Tomas's jaw tightened. I know what he takes. No, she said. You know the line on the map. The animals know the water. Winter knows the grass. There is a difference. His eyes hardened. You've been here less than 2 weeks, and the numbers have been here longer than that, waiting for someone to make them speak to each other. For a moment she thought he might order her out. Pride was a dangerous animal when wounded. She had seen men feed everything they loved to pride and call the bones honor. Hostein entered quietly behind him and leaned against the doorframe. Tomas did not look away from Mari. What do you think? You see a shortfall, she said, but not a grave. She turned the ledger toward him and laid the supply slate beside it. You're counting only the cattle ready to sell and the cash on hand. That makes you short. But you've got wool still here that should have gone last week. You've got hides salted enough to trade. Piñon nuts bagged and doing nobody any good in a shed. 7 lambs that are light but can be pushed if fed right. 3 steers the same. Kitchen scraps, corn mash, and measured grain will do more than worry. Coffee can be cut without the men knowing it if I boil it proper. Sugar can wait. Squash and beans can carry the table if Clara and I preserve hard starting tomorrow. Clara lifted her chin a little at the sound of her name. Mari pointed to the final column she had made. You move the wool before the road closes. Hosteen trades the pinion and hides where Crowell's men don't set the price. You sell the lambs and steers before the worst winter drop. You make the payment with a little left, not much, but enough that Crowell leaves with empty hands. Tomas looked at the page. His anger had not gone, but it had lost its footing. Hosteen came closer, studied the figures, and nodded once. The old roots can still carry trade. Tomas said, those lambs need more time. They need 3 weeks of being fed with intention instead of hope. His eyes lifted to hers. She felt suddenly the weight of every look ever laid across her body like a sentence. Calvin Pike's smirk, freightmen laughing into coffee, women pretending pity was kindness, men assuming appetite where there had been discipline. She had been measured wrong all her life and had lived anyway. People look at me, she said quietly, and think they know what hunger I have, what work I avoid, what I understand and what I don't. They mistake size for appetite and silence for stupidity. But I learned from my mother that survival belongs to the one who can count what is left and make it enough. No one moved. The stove clicked softly as the fire settled. At last, Tomas pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down. He looked not at her body, not at the open box, not at his wounded pride, but at the column of figures. Then we count it your way, he said. By dawn, the ranch had become a tighter thing. Hosteen rode out with 2 pack animals and a list written in Mari's hand. Clara cut squash until her fingers ached and laid the pieces to cure near the stove. Tomas sent Abel and Sisto to ready the wool wagon. Mari saved every scrap from breakfast and mixed it with mash for the south pen where the light lambs pushed their noses into the trough as if they knew their own importance. The cold held. The sky lowered, work sharpened. 3 days later, Elias Crowell rode back through a thin veil of snow, expecting to find the ranch already bending. He opened the cookhouse door, then stopped. Tomas sat at the table. Hosteen stood behind him. Clara was marking supplies on the slate, and Mari sat with the ledger open, one flour-dusted hand resting beside the numbers. Crowell's eyes moved from the ledger to her face. For the first time he truly saw her, not kindly, not fully, but enough to understand there was something in the kitchen he had failed to count. The 15th still comes, he said. Mari closed the ledger with one steady hand. So does morning, she said, and we have work before both. Snow had softened the red edges of the mesas by morning, laying white along the stone shelves and in the folds of the Piñon ridges until the whole country looked older than it had the day before. It did not fall hard. It came steady and fine, the kind of snow that did not frighten a person at first, and then by noon had covered wagon ruts, hidden stones, and made every distance seem farther than it was. Mari stood at the cookhouse window before dawn and watched Tomas cross the yard with an axe over one shoulder. His coat was buttoned wrong in the dark, and his hat carried a thin white line along the brim. He went to the trough first, as he had done every morning since the freeze, and broke the ice with short, efficient blows that rang through the yard like iron bells. Inside the kitchen breathed warm around her. The stove was already alive. Coffee darkened in the pot, beans simmered low with chili and onion. 3 pans of bread dough sat covered near the warmest wall, rising slowly beneath clean cloth. Clara slept in a chair by the wood box with her shawl pulled tight, having meant to rest only a minute after cutting squash past midnight. Her head had tipped sideways, and one hand still held the pencil she used to mark the supply slate. Mari took the pencil gently from her fingers and set it on the table. The girl had learned fast. Fear had not left her, but it had stopped driving. There was a difference. The ranch had been living by differences for 3 weeks. A little less coffee boiled stronger. A little less sugar saved for men coming in half frozen. Squash cut before rot could touch it. Bones simmered twice. Corn mash mixed with kitchen scraps for the lambs that needed weight. Hides bundled and sent with Hosteen through old trading paths Crowell's men did not watch. Wool moved to gallop before the heaviest snow closed the road. Every meal counted. Every animal counted. Every hour of weather counted. Mari had once been told she took up too much room. Now, the whole ranch depended on the room she knew how to make inside scarcity. Hostine returned near noon with his scarf stiff from cold and 2 pack animals carrying corn beans and a little dried meat traded from families who still remembered Tomas's mother with respect. He came through the cookhouse door only after knocking, which had become a quiet rule without anyone speaking it aloud. "Road to Gallop is still passable," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "Not kindly, but passable." Mari looked up from the dough. "Tomas, coming behind with Abel. They have the receipt." Clara, awake now and red-eyed, stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. The receipt. Hostine's mouth moved around the beginning of a smile. Paper with enough ink to make a thief unhappy. Mari's hand stilled in the dough. For 3 weeks, she had not allowed herself to imagine that moment too clearly. Hope handled too early could burn like a pan grabbed bare-handed. She had kept to numbers to flour, to feed to the weight of lambs, to the soundness of wagon wheels. She had kept her eyes on the work because the work had no patience for fear. But when Tomas came in an hour later, snow on his shoulders and a folded receipt inside his coat, the kitchen seemed to draw one long breath. He did not speak at first. He laid the paper on the table beside the ledger. Paid. Mari read the word once. Then again. Clara covered her mouth. Hostine nodded as if he had never doubted it, though his eyes had gone bright in the lamplight. Tomas looked at Mari and the tiredness in his face had changed. It was still there, carved deep as wagon tracks, but something had lifted beneath it. "One day early," he said. Mari wiped her hands on her apron because they had flour on them and because they needed something to do. "Then the spring stays yours." "Ours," he said. The word came quietly, but it did not pass quietly through her. Before she could answer, a horse sounded in the yard. No one needed to look out the window to know. Elias Crowell arrived with snow on his black coat and anger polished smooth beneath his face. His hired man stayed mounted near the corral. Crowell came to the cookhouse steps, lifted his hand toward the latch and stopped. Hostine was already at the door. The old man did not block it rudely. He simply stood where a man would have to decide whether he was entering a home or violating one. Crowell's eyes tightened. Then he knocked. Hostine opened the door. Cold moved in around Crowell's boots. He looked first at Tomas, then at the ledger, then at Mari. His gaze did not pass over her this time. It struck and held not with respect but with the knowledge that an enemy once overlooked had become visible too late. "I understand you made a trip to Gallop," Crowell said. Tomas picked up the receipt and handed it to him. "The note is paid." Crowell unfolded the paper. His face remained composed, but his hand betrayed him tightening once at the edge. "So it is." He looked around the cookhouse, Clara near the stove. Hostine at the door, Abel and Sisto just outside, pretending not to listen, the bread rising under cloth, the stew pot breathing chilly into the room. His mouth bent. A remarkable recovery for a ranch supposedly held together by winter scraps. His eyes settled on Mari. Though perhaps I should not be surprised. A kitchen woman with a generous appetite would know how to keep provisions close. The room went so still that the stove seemed loud. Clara's face went white. Hostine's hand shifted once at his side. Tomas took half a step, then stopped. Mari saw that stopping. He had not abandoned her to the insult. He had trusted her to answer it. That mattered more than rescue would have. She came around the table slowly. She felt the weight of her own body as she moved, the body men had named before they knew her, the body that had carried water, lifted flowers, stood through fever nights, walked 2 days hungry, knelt beside blood, bent over ledgers, and refused to be made into shame because others were small in their seeing. She stopped in front of Crowell. "I was not made small by hunger, and I will not be made small by kindness." The words did not rise. They did not need to. They landed plain and whole. Crowell's expression flickered. Mari pointed to the ledger. "You counted the debt. You counted the freeze. You counted the spring. You counted on tired men and thin stores and pride keeping Mr. Yazzie from asking for help. But you did not count the wool in the shed, the hides and salt, the pinion sacks, the lambs that could gain if fed right, the steers that needed intention instead of hope, or the girl who could mark stores better than any man here once someone trusted her hand." Clara's eyes filled, but she stood straighter. Mari continued, each word measured. "You did not count Hostine knowing roads your buyers never heard of. You did not count coffee, stretched without weakening men sugar, saved for weather bones, boiled twice squash, cured before rot, or scraps put into feed instead of waste. You did not count the kitchen because men like you think kitchens are where women disappear." She looked at him then with all the steadiness hunger had failed to take from her. "That is why you lost. Crowell folded the receipt very carefully. You speak boldly for hired help. Tomas stepped beside Mari, not in front of her. She speaks accurately, he said. Your business here is finished. For a moment, Crowell looked as if he might spend another insult. But there are men who know when money has stopped working in a room, and Crowell was one of them. He placed the receipt on the table as though it had offended him and turned toward the door. Hosteen opened it. The cold took him back. No one spoke until the sound of his horse faded beyond the yard. Then Abel from outside let out a breath loud enough for two men. Sisto laughed once, sharp and relieved. Clara sat down hard and began crying without making a sound. Mari went to her and put one hand on the girl's shoulder. Enough of that, she said gently. We have bread to bake. Clara laughed through the tears, which was better than stopping them. That night the meal was not rich, but it felt like a feast because it had been earned. Mutton stew beans with red chili fresh fry, bread coffee, and dried peach cobbler made from the last fruit in the crock. The men ate with the reverent silence Mari had heard on her first night, but this silence had a deeper root. It was not only hunger being answered, it was fear leaving the body. Hosteen spoke a short blessing in Navajo before lifting his spoon. Tomas bowed his head. Clara served without trembling. Later, when the bowls were washed and the men had gone to the bunkhouse, the kitchen settled into its oldest language. Fire ticking down coffee, poured wind. Pressing snow against the dark windows, two people sitting on opposite sides of a table that no longer felt like distance. Tomas turned his cup once. My mother used to say a ranch doesn't live first in the corrals. Mari waited. She said it lives where the fire is kept. I thought she meant food. I was young enough to think a thing that keeps you alive is simple. He looked toward the stove, then back at her. After she died, I kept the stock watered and the fences standing. I paid wages when I could. I kept moving. But this place was hollow in the middle, and I was too proud or too tired to name it. Mari looked at the ledger closed now beside the flour bin. No longer forbidden, no longer lonely. You were grieving, she said. Yes. He accepted the word like a man accepting a debt, and you came here hungry after being treated poorly by people who should have known better. I asked if you could cook because I needed a cook. That was true, but it isn't the whole truth anymore. The snow whispered against the glass. I want you to stay, Mari, not until spring, not until the road's clear, not until you find a place that looks finer from the outside. I want you to stay because this ranch has already begun to stand around you, and I would rather ask honest than let a true thing go unnamed. She looked around the kitchen. Clara slept again near the stove, too tired to make it to her bed. Hosteen's hat hung by the door. Bread for morning rose beneath clean cloth. The receipt lay safe inside the ledger. Outside, the South Spring still belonged to the ranch. Inside, the room was warm with work smoke and something that had not been here when Mari first crossed its threshold, with dust on her skirt and spoiled fruit sour in her mouth. She thought of the mesquite wash, the prickly pear, Calvin Pike's laughter, the long road, the way Tomas had taken off his hat before asking the question that gave her back to herself. I will stay, she said. Tomas let out a breath he had been holding for longer than that evening, but not as a woman taken in out of pity, she said. No, the kitchen is mine. It is. Clara stays under my teaching. Yes, the accounts open when survival needs them. A faint smile touched his mouth. I learned that. And no man enters this kitchen without knocking. Tomas glanced toward the door Crowell had used and nodded once. No man. Mari sat back satisfied, not because she had been granted something, but because the truth had finally been spoken in terms sturdy enough to hold. Outside, the snow kept falling over the yard, over the corrals, over the saved road to the South Spring. The sheep were quiet. The horses shifted in the barn. From the bunkhouse came the low sound of men laughing at something Abel had said. Ordinary laughter, the kind a place makes when fear has loosened its fist. Tomas said her name then, Mari. Not carefully, not testing it, simply as if it belonged in the room. She rose to check the bread before it overrisen, because belonging did not excuse neglect, and tomorrow would still require breakfast before dawn. At the stove, she lifted the cloth and saw the dough, full and living, beneath her hands. She had come to the ranch with nothing but hunger, a blanket, a coffee tin, and the knowledge of how to turn what was left into what was needed. By winter, the whole place depended on her. Not because she had become someone else, because the right place had finally learned how to see her. Mari covered the bread again, crossed to the door, and looked once into the white quiet. Then she closed the kitchen against the cold.